Welcome to the Daily Grace Podcast. Here at the Daily Grace Co., our mission is to equip disciples in the Word. We believe that deep Bible study and rich theology are not just for the seminary student or pastor, but they are accessible for all believers. We hope these conversations will invite you into a deeper relationship with the Lord and to remind you that the gospel changes everything.
Of all the books in the Bible, Revelation intimidates readers the most. What does it mean? Is it literal? Symbolic? How does it apply to today, to the future? What is God really trying to communicate through this unique letter? Revelation, the end of time and the eternal King, is a verse-by-verse expositional study of the book of Revelation intended to make perhaps the most difficult and controversial book of the Bible accessible to the average reader. Get this study on Revelation and learn what each verse reveals and be filled with peace and hope.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daily Grace Podcast. This is Krystal, and today I am joined by a friend of the pod, Tara's son. Tara, welcome back to the Daily Grace Podcast.
Krystal, it is so fun to be back. One of my favorite listens, one of my favorite companies. This was a joy to be on like a year ago, I believe. And so to come back with you it's going to be so fun. So thank you.
Oh, it's such a joy. We were kind of chatting a little bit before we started recording, and anytime you get to talk to someone who's like in the same vein, like writing and podcasting and teaching, it's just so much fun. And last time you were on, about a year ago, we talked about the freedom of surrender, and it was such a powerful conversation. I'm going to link it in our show notes for anyone who missed it the first time around, but that was based on a book that you released a few years ago. And now you have a new book coming out into the world that I think is really going to resonate with our audience. And the title is one of those things that just kind of like hits you. You know, when you read it, you're like, ooh, yes, I need this. It is called Overbooked and Overwhelmed, How to Keep Up with God When You're Just Trying to Keep Up with Life. And I'm like, yes, I need that encouragement. I think a lot of women need that. And this book is coming out today. The day that this episode releases, you could get this book on Amazon. We're going to link that to you. So happy book release day, Tara.
Thank you. It always feels really surreal. Like, I call these my book babies.
Yes.
And it's really funny because I have 2 boys and 2 books now. And my literary agent, just to pull back the curtain for people listening, my literary agent is like, Tara, like, with how long the process takes, it's just really funny how it aligns. Like, my first book came out when my son was 1, and then this one, I have a 6-month-old. So I don't know. She's like, it's a pattern that you have actual babies and book babies.
Yes.
So,
I've called that before. And I actually said that to one of our male guests. And I was like, I don't think that quite resonates with you in the same way that maybe it would for someone else. But it is like, you have birthed something that's come out of the world that you've labored over. And so we're just so excited to get to talk about this and, anything else that maybe pops up in our conversation. So as a host of your own podcast, I love talking to podcasters because there's things that just arise, things that are like fun in interviews or maybe things that go off kilter. I told the story recently to someone about an interview that I did as one of my first interviews ever. And then we realized that my side of the audio did not record. And so I had to re-record my part of an interview as if it was live. So just like...
No way.
Just sneak peek. If anyone just wants to know, go back and look at some early interviews and see if you can guess. Yeah, so I had to put on the so I'm just curious if you have like a favorite moment, whether it's like something like that or just like something special that sticks out to you.
Yeah, well, I've definitely had my fair share of mishaps like that. I've had some where like the right things weren't connected and it sounded like I was underwater. And I'm like, I swear I've been doing this for like 5 or 6 years. And the fact that like this stuff still happens is crazy. I've had everything from my toddler who was being watched by my mom in the other room, like come knock on the door. I've had that happen to guests. And it just makes me laugh. And there's all the grace. And I think because I'm a mom, because I just realized life happens, it's just funny and it's real. And some of it we've kept in. I mean, I don't have like a crazy studio as much as I wish. And so sometimes maybe go back and listen to my episodes. You'll hear a plane or a lawnmower or our neighbor's 3 dogs. Like, it's just real,
Yes. It's always when you're recording. We always joke about that because I would have a lawn service come by when we were recording remotely. And it did not matter when we recorded. There were always the like brrr, like right outside the door. And I was like, oh, could the timing be worse? So
seriously,
life of a podcaster. I get it. Okay, well, I'm excited to talk a little bit more about this idea of feeling overwhelmed, feeling overbooked, just feeling at your max and realizing that it's not the way it's supposed to be. I think there's something in our society, even within the church, that kind of glorifies busyness. Like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so busy. That's like always our response. And it feels weird if we're not busy. Like, we feel like, am I doing enough if I don't feel overwhelmed? So it's kind of this lie that we've bought into. And so I'm really thankful for your work and your labor going into this book to be able to encourage us with the gospel, to encourage us with these gospel truths. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what brought you to even writing this book. You know, you had this turning point when you realized that, man, I have been living just disconnected and distracted and all of the things.
Yeah.
So would you just share a little bit about that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that honestly, I've always been, and we talked about this in the last episode, I've always been type A achiever, always been like, I like to keep myself busy. And it's not even necessarily a bad thing, but it wasn't until about 4 years ago that it wasn't just busy, but it was like overwhelmed to the point of burnout, to the point of like literally crying multiple times a day, Krystal. Like it was crazy. And it just got to that point where I thought for a long time that it was just external, right? Like it was just these little things happening. I can just push through it, you know, whatever. And then these little warning signs, these little yellow flags started popping up in my life from God, where it was like, you know what? It's not just an external problem. We need to look a little deeper inside to what's going on. And so this book really came out of a season of me trying to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders, and just thinking that I had to keep up, and good responsibilities, right? Taking care of a home and a husband and young boys and all of these things, and like very worthy things. But because of the overwhelm, because of all the responsibility and pressure that I put on myself, it really led me to keep being busy, to hustle, to not rest. And then I just started numbing out with distractions. And I've always loved Jesus, and I would always say, you know, Jesus is enough for me, and he's where my rest comes from, and he is my peace, and he is my comfort. And yet, confronted with the most responsibility and the busiest calendar I'd ever had in my entire life, instead of running to Jesus as my source, I started scrolling social media. I started chasing productivity instead of proximity with Jesus. I started doing all these other things, and I started to realize just how disconnected I had gotten from the Lord. And I had these questions, just to be very vulnerable, like, when was the last time I opened my Bible? Like, when was the last time I opened it just to be with him and not to produce something, right? And so that was kind of my moment. I talk about in the first chapter, literally the first page, that I was crying and weeping at midnight over the kitchen sink. And I'm like, wait, there's something wrong. Like this, it's more than dishes. It's about my soul here. So that kind of started the journey through that. And also, to peel back the curtain a little bit, when I signed my book contract, I had a second book in place, but I didn't know what it was going to be about. And I never was putting pressure on myself about what that was going to be. And just like the Lord does, he started creating this in me even before we started writing this. And so when it came around, I'm like, oh, yes, this, because it's not just something that I believe I need. I'm seeing it in culture everywhere. I think everyone's feeling it.
Yeah. And again, it is so normalized. And so we often do look to those outer circumstances like, oh, it's just a busy season. When I get through this, then it will be better. And then that next busy season, oh, when I just get through this. And you say that enough times, and then months or years pass by, and you look back and it's like, man, there's just so much that I think can distract us and deceive us into thinking that like this is normal and this is good. And so the thing that you said about like proximity and productivity, I was like, that cut to my heart. I was like, yes, you want to show that we've done something. You know, we can do that in our Bible reading plan, but we do that in work and family. There's something about proximity to Jesus and sitting with him that can feel not productive, or can feel like, what have I done today? Like, what can I show for my day? And that's such a ugly aspect of just the flesh, but I think it just creeps in without even realizing it. And so I appreciate even just hearing how you walked through it, in that even as someone who is teaching and podcasting and writing, like you're not immune to those seasons and to learning those hard truths. And yet the Lord gets to redeem that through you writing and processing to then help others, which I think is like, what a kindness of the Lord that he gets to use that in our lives.
Yeah.
One of the things that you talk about is this contrast of the abundant life and the overcommitted life. I think if we hear those two, we often are probably drawn more to like the overcommitted life. Like maybe we don't even know what the abundant life looks like. So how would you define those? And then what are some practical things that we can do as believers to experience that abundant life?
Yeah. Well, that comes from John 10:10, right? And it's probably one of the most quoted verses in scripture where Jesus says, I didn't come, the thief comes to, right, kill, steal, destroy, all these things, but I came to give life to the full. Some versions say full, some say abundant. And I've always read that verse thinking, truly, again, another vulnerable moment. I've known the Lord for my whole life, but I think until I really started to know God and know the word, I kind of just thought the abundant life meant just like full of a lot of things, which yes, that's true. But I think it's really easy for us as Christians in the century that we're living in the culture with social media and all of these things with all the messages, to think that the abundant life means a life without any space. Life that is absolutely crammed full to the max. And so we start to live that way, right? And that's the whole subtitle. Like we try to keep up with the world. We try to keep up with other people, what they're achieving, what we think we should achieve, instead of realizing, oh, wait, that abundant life that we were given through Jesus Christ when he died and raised himself to life was not one full without any space for him. It's actually one that is consumed by walking at his pace, keeping up with him, doing what he wants us to do, finding rest in him and not in the world. And so that overcommitted life really, and what I talk about in the book, is just talking about a life that leaves no room for regular time with Jesus, a life that leaves no room, full of commitments and responsibilities, that we get to the end of the day and we think, oh, where did I spend time with God? Did I open my Bible? Did I pray? Was I present? Did I rest? But then in contrast, the abundant life is really saying, Jesus, how do you want me to keep up with you? Because I know as a Christian that you've paid it all and that there's nothing I need to prove. I can't earn that on my own. And so I don't need to keep up with the world or prove anything to the world or to anyone around me. Instead, I just need to keep up with you. And to figure out where we're supposed to keep up and how we're supposed to keep up, it's found in the word. And so it's this whole cycle of like, we got to know that abundant life through the word.
I love that. And it is so funny, kind of the like, I don't know if I would say irony, but when we think about a full life, and then we equate that with like a full calendar, but like we're full of the wrong things, or we're full of like temporal pleasures and, joys of the world instead of, full of, what God has in store for us. And, we look at the life of Jesus and we're like, oh, he drew away to pray and he was with people. And like, that was just a different time. Like, he didn't have the distractions. He didn't have the this, that, or other, which, yes, that is true. But we kind of create this like false narrative that like, that is impossible for us. Like what he's calling us to feels impossible. And it is a challenge. It is hard. There are a lot of distractions. There are more and more things. Even as my kids are growing up, what they know to be normal was not normal for me. So I get that reality. But man, when we continue to make that as an excuse, like we just get further and further away from what the Lord is just inviting us to. And I think that's what our soul craves, but we just feel like it's so out of reach. And so I love just thinking about like very practical ways that we can step into that abundant life that honestly he's already given us. And it's just us experiencing it and slowing down and being with the Lord. What do you think it looks like for us if we're looking at, walking at the pace of Jesus, right, that you talk about, instead of the pace of the world? I think one is maybe a little bit more natural to us than the other. What do you think that looks like?
100%. So one thing that a friend, Jess Connolly, shared, she's also a podcaster, author, she said something that hit me the other day. She said, how much of what we have on our calendars that is overwhelming us do we self-impose? And I'm like, oof. Like, it's so true. So I think the first practical I would ask you is taking a very honest look, a very base level look at what you are committing to in a day, in a week, in a month. Like, what is in your routine? What is in your rhythms? And be really honest about, like, we say, oh, I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. I can't get through the day without breaking down or crying. Then we look at, like, what are the things that we are saying yes to that are contributing to that anxiety, to that stress, to those feelings? Are we going 7 days a week and neglecting rest like God has given us? Are we trying to make 30 things absolute in our calendar on a day instead of maybe 5? That's more doable, right? And so I just think one of the first things is just being very realistic and realizing that, you know what? God has given us free will, and that's a gift. But with that comes the need to ask God for wisdom and discernment and say, okay, here's what I have. Can you show me what I may need to cut out, say no to, in order to live a little bit more lighter, in order to live a little more intentionally? There's a chapter that I love in the book, and it talks about the power of your yes and your no. And how when you say no to something, which to a Christian feels like a curse word, like we hate to say no. I used to hate to say no, but now I don't actually feel that way sometimes, but mostly I don't feel that way. But the reality is when you say no to something, you also get to say yes to something else. So if I say no to going away for a little bit, for work or something and leaving my boys at home, I actually get to be home with them. Like my yes is my trade-off is being with them and being present with them. And so just even looking at that and saying, Lord, give me the wisdom to peel back the layers and see what would be like the best, most intentional yes. And I also just think, Krystal, there's some nuance to this conversation that I don't want women to think that we have to completely clear our calendars and that you have to throw your phone in the woods and live like a hermit to be present and prioritize God, right? But I think it's this idea of like when we are consulting God about our decisions, about our calendars, instead of making plans without Him, that enables us to be able to handle the busier seasons of life. Because right now I'm in a really busy season, but I know in a couple months it's going to get a little lighter. But the Lord, grounding myself in His presence, that helps me to handle those ebbs and flows. And then the last thing I'll say on this is just to get very creative and get flexible and have the freedom in having your time with God maybe not look like hers, maybe not look like what you see on social media, and maybe look different for a season. I know I'm talking a lot about being a mom, but that's my current season. I have a 3-year-old and I have a 6-month-old. And so my current Bible time routine, it's not an hour uninterrupted usually every day now. It's not. I wish it was, but it's not. And so the other day, my son was listening to his Tony box, listening to Thomas and Friends, and I pulled out my Is God Enough for Me Bible study, and I was doing that on the bed, listening to Thomas the Train in the background. And just, I think, realizing that God's presence is with us in every single moment. God is always near to us, but how near are we to Him? That's something we talk about in the book too. Like God's presence never wanes from us. But like, how close are we to Him? How are we using the time and some of those opportunities and the margins of our life to be with Him?
Gosh, there's so much there. That's so good. And it's just good reminders. I think sometimes we try to overcomplicate what it looks like to rest and what it looks like to try to say no. I think there is that like, if I'm going to disappoint them, then I don't want to say no. But then like, what do we gain from that yes? We often lose whenever we're saying yes to things. And so I love even just that dichotomy of saying no to something, even if it's good, means saying yes to something that's often better for where you're at, for, and maybe in 6 months, it might flip-flop. What's best for you might be different. And yeah, I think that kind of speaks to being content with where the Lord has you, which is so hard. But then when you know that you've gone to the Lord in those decisions, and when you are in that busy season, like God's going to sustain me. I trust Him in this. He's brought me here. He's going to bring me through it, versus the day-to-day like panic when you open up your calendar, or the panic when you get your phone out and there's so many notifications. Like it's just a perspective shift that I think would be really intentional to do. I would be in favor of throwing my phone into the woods, honestly. Like if I had the option of just like not being on social media and not having access to my phones, I ended up getting a brick app, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I just know I don't have the discipline, like just like where I'm at. And that's something I have to like actually work towards. And so that is just like one step that I'm trying to make. And even doing that, it feels painful. Like that discipline feels painful. But then when I get to the end of the day, after I've done that, I'm like, I didn't lose anything by doing that. Like what I gained was mental clarity. What I gained was space and time with others. Like
Yeah.
you just start
Yeah.
to see it when you have that perspective, not looking at what am I losing out on, which is easy when you don't have like social media or
Right.
whatever it is. But man, what I gain is actually so much better for me. So that way when I
Yeah.
can unbrick my phone, then I know that like,
There you
hey,
go.
this isn't something that I have to feel satisfied or to
Right.
feel connected. And so anyway, I love this. I'm also very passionate about this because I am just bad at this. And so I think the things that I am weakest in are the things that I feel the most passionate about, because whenever
Yeah.
I see the Lord and his grace in my life in these spaces, like it's that much sweeter because I know it's him and it's not me being like uber disciplined in all of the things.
Right.
And
Well, and
I
I
just get
think,
more of him.
yeah, no, what you kept saying, Krystal, is resonating with me so much too. And the Lord is like hitting me over the head with this book again. I love that he does that really, truly, though, because I'm like, I need this daily. I need the gospel daily. I need God's presence daily. Like I'm reminded of this, but something you said just reminded me that, I think we think a lot of life is so urgent. Like it's like has to be done today. Like it has to be completed today. Like if I don't get it done today, then what's going to happen? And I think that's a lot of the fear that we all have. Like if I don't show up in this way, if I don't say yes, if I don't get the house cleaned and get my work done or make this amount of money or whatever, we just have all these what ifs. They're like, what's going to happen? We have this fear of what might fall apart, right? But like really in doing that, we fall apart. And we think that life is so urgent when really, I think, oh man, I'm trying to remember who said this. There's a quote that's always in my head, and I have to remember it was an author or speaker, and they said something about like the most urgent of life necessitates an urgency with Jesus. Something along those lines, that the most urgent things in life, what you really need is Jesus. What you really need is his presence first to enable you to do that. Like obviously life is serious and eternity is serious and discipleship and spreading the gospel is serious. But I think some of the other more trivial things, right? Like social media, some of the distractions, some of the things that we think mean a lot, but are actually more temporal, those aren't the most urgent, right? And so the most urgent, just like Mary sitting at Jesus, his feet, she chose to do that. And like Jesus said, it won't be taken away from her because those are the eternal things. And she didn't just sit. She didn't just stop physically. It says that she listened. So like, can we slow ourselves down enough to not just like be still, but also listen and receive? Because then in doing that, it'll help us with everything else that's overwhelming us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's such a great point when we're talking about urgency, when we look at what urgent things on our calendar or in our lives are self-imposed. And I think when we look through that lens of like, what am I doing to myself that I actually don't need to be doing? What are the things that I put on? Because I love being productive. I love getting things done. But when I fill up my to-do list with things that I know physically I cannot do, but I write it down anyway, and then I feel this like guilt at the end of the day. And I'm like, what am I doing to myself? Like no one else, especially the Lord, is asking me to extend myself beyond the boundaries that he has created in my life, whether it is time or energy or skill set or whatever it is. And so I think even stepping back and looking at like, how are we almost hindering our own ability to come to the Lord, to be able to rest because of all these other things that culturally, even within the church, are like acceptable. And so anyway, I feel like anytime I have a podcast interview of this nature, it feels like a personal counseling session in some ways where I'm like,
Same though.
yeah, interesting. The Lord's showing me some things right now that I'm processing, but also this is like not just a conversation for me, but for others. So my prayer is that others are kind of feeling that same way, like, yeah, I need to get with the Lord and really think through this. I need to prioritize and I need to like sit and rest, and like what does that look like? And so maybe that's just even an encouragement for anyone who like turns off this episode, as they really think about like, what's that one thing I can sit down and do, or even what's the one thing I maybe shouldn't do? What's the one thing that maybe I need to say no to so I can say yes to the better thing that Jesus has for me?
That's good.
So how would you, for someone like me who tends to feel shame or tends to like beat themselves up over like the times they don't do this, or maybe their bent is towards that productivity and not leaning into the proximity of Jesus, like how can we process that and go to the Lord in that shame?
This is such a good question. when I was writing this, it wasn't really something that I thought to address until I started writing it. And I started thinking, I felt this way. And I'm sure other people have, where it's like, you know these truths to be true. Like we know that God's word is true. And we have all these goals, these spiritual goals, these things, these commands to fulfill, and we're trying to do. But because we're human, because we live in a broken world, because we mess up, and we may not do this the way that we want to do. We may not prioritize Jesus. We may not rest as good as we should and as God tells us to. And so then we start to spiral into, well, I haven't done it very well before, so why should I try? Or the world is just like this. I think this is just how it is. Or, man, I have overwhelmed and overbooked my calendar and distracted myself so much that I haven't been with Jesus in so long. What is he going to think when I come back? Or I don't even know how to come back. Like, these are all of the messages from the enemy that are subtly shaming us into keeping us further away from Jesus. But what I love to remember is that whole idea of presence too, is that, like, number one, God is not surprised. And that shouldn't be a shame thing either. That God knows our frame, that God knows that we would do this, and yet he still loves us. He sent Jesus to the cross in spite of what we have done, past, present, and future. And he still loves us, and he still went after us, and he still goes after us. And so just the fact that, like, God's not surprised by our weakness. He actually meets us in our weakness, and he gives us new morning mercies. I'm always encouraged by that. There's a part in the book too that I share that my parents have always inspired me with. And it's like, you know what? You can wake up every morning, the moment your eyes wake up, and say, Lord, I love you. I'm going to follow you today. I think so much of life we think, and maybe that's why we're overwhelmed, is because we try to take on weeks and months and years at a time, when life is just a day-by-day process. It's really just abiding in Jesus today, because that's all we can control is today and what we have on our plates today, because who knows what tomorrow's going to hold. And so just knowing that, I also think knowing that God loves the prodigal son too. I think we read that story, and of course it's a miraculous story, but I used to think, the prodigal son gets such a bad rap, but you know what? We're all the prodigal son. And how was he welcomed back home? With open arms, with a celebration, with a party. And I think if you're a little exhausted today and you're like, you know what? I haven't done this well. I feel guilt. I feel shame. One thing I want to tell you is that you may not feel like you have enough energy. Like, Tara, Krystal, I don't know how much energy I have to give to Jesus. I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so tired. Like, where do I even start? One thing I say in the book is that God doesn't care if it's 10 steps, if it's one step, if it's a stumbling step, if you're dragging yourself, that what God will do with your coming to him, with your rags, with your brokenness, God can meet you in his abundance. And so maybe there's just some hope there for someone listening too, is that God does not condemn. That's the enemy. So we need to discern between those voices and the world. And then just knowing that you can come to God with whatever you have, and he will meet you with his overflow. That's been changing my life currently, because I'm like, God, I don't have much to give, but I know what I can give. You love and you honor, you receive, and then you overflow. Then you bless me with. And that's just so kind of him.
Yeah, it really is. And it goes back to, like, he knows where we're at. He's not going to be surprised when we come to him. It's like, man, I have just been neglecting time with you. Like, it's not going to throw him off. It's not going to, distract him from his plan. Like, oh, Krystal hasn't been spending time with me today. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, I think we start to make him smaller and smaller in those moments when we feel like that he is going to be deterred because I didn't read my Bible today. And honestly, that's really freeing when we remember that, like, I am not God. He is not me. My thoughts are not his thoughts, It really is, like, it puts him in his rightful place, but also it's, like, very humbling to say, like, God, forgive me. I just haven't done what I know that I'm supposed to do, and there's freedom and grace there, and he loves me. Like, he calls me, like, come to me. Are you weary? Are you heavy laden? Like, come to me. He doesn't say, fix all of that, and then you can come to me. He's like, good. Come to me with all of that. And yet, in the prodigal son story, I want to be the older son. I want to be like, hey, this is the right thing to do. Like, what's going? And yet God loves, like, the father loves them both, And so whether you identify in one or both of those sons, like, that is just, we are both of them at different times, and God's grace covers us, And so I just think that is so encouraging. And I'm hoping it is lifting burdens off of shoulders as women are listening to this, that they are reminded that their worth and their value isn't in what they get accomplished. It's not in how busy they are or even in how not busy they are. Like, don't let this go to the other extreme of like, oh, I rest so well. Like,
Yeah.
they all of a sudden look at me. But really, like,
Mm.
it's about Jesus. Like, it's about where our priorities and our focus and our attention is. Like, let this drive you to Jesus.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, God has made us stewards, right? And in
yes.
scripture, he used a lot of parables and analogies of being a steward. And in our current culture, that word may not make sense. So think of it as a manager. So God has made us managers over the things in our life. So how are we handling them? And again, this is not like a guilt thing to say, oh, if you're not handling it well, then shape up. But it is I think a moment of holy conviction where we need to step back and say, okay, Lord, if I genuinely want to be a good steward and manager of the things you've given me, my family, my finances, my work, my ministry, my home, my friendships, whatever, like, am I operating out of distraction? Am I operating out of overwhelm? Am I burnt out? Because if I am, then that's not being a good steward of the life that you've given me. And so help me to reprioritize. Help me to live a little bit more like less distracted and more devoted. Like that is really a good perspective shift for me too. Because I think sometimes we get so caught up in living like life for me when it's like, no, I want to be a good steward, but I also have to have healthy fruit. I have to have healthy rhythms and live by what God actually says to be a good steward, right?
Yes. Oh, it's so true. And I think it's going back to saying no to what might be good to say yes to something better. And in our church, there's this sign that says doing and being, and there's kind of the like greater than side. So it's like you need to be being with Jesus. Like you need to be with Jesus, overdo things for Jesus. But then in my heart, I'm like, yeah, but what can I do? Like I could be with Jesus, but like what should I do? It's just kind of that like that's like the ugly part of my heart that's like, yeah, but I need to, it's almost like this performing, like I need to do something for Jesus to kind of like earn my place at his feet. And everything we see about Jesus in scripture points to the opposite, right? Like we sit at his feet to be with him, not to perform or do for him. But there is just really practical things that I think that we need to be aware of. You know, resting isn't just like not doing anything, to your point about stewardship. It's not just like ignoring the responsibilities and the things that the Lord has given us, but it's prioritizing and putting them in their rightful place. And so I'm curious if there's any like practical tips or questions or anything that you include in the book that you personally found helpful, or just anything that you might be able to like give a little sneak peek to our audience for what they could, you know, expect in your book.
Absolutely. Well, at the end of every single chapter, and there's 10 chapters of the book, there are reflection questions, which are amazing, just to kind of get your wheels turning, make it practical for your life. But also in almost every chapter, there's a section where we get very practical, and there's tips that you can implement literally the moment you're reading, literally that day, which is really fun to look at the gospel truth and then look about like, how does this actually apply to my life, which I know that you love, the show loves, the company loves. And so that has been life-changing for me, even to be refreshed in that. But I would say a really big practical tip that I share in the book is to rethink Sabbath and to not be stubborn about it. I think we're overwhelmed and overbooked because we're not living in a restful state. But I say this because get practical about what rest looks like, and to not think that it's just laying horizontal on the couch and binging Netflix, right? Rest, and we go into this in the book, and I'll try to keep it short, but rest is really like a reorientation with God. It's a moment for your soul to breathe. It's following the example of God from Genesis, where we get to not just be still, but to celebrate and to enjoy his creation and to enjoy other people. The Israelites showed us they stopped everything, even in the middle of their crises and their struggles, and life was lifing. And they are like, nope, it's Sabbath. I'm going to party. I'm going to be with my people. I'm going to rest. I'm going to stop working. I'm going to eat good food. And so even just like that is a huge tip, I would say. Another thing is just like, I mean, we have a chapter about weariness. When your soul is weary from all of the overwhelm of life, how do you revive that soul? Something very practical is trying a new thing. I mean, repentance is turning a new way. We know that biblically, it's turning from an old way onto a new way. But if we apply that, it's like there is a lot of science, there's a lot of research, and there's a lot of things that I've seen in my life about trying something new. Sometimes our rhythms and our routines become stale. Sometimes they become just a little bit more rigid, and we need something to draw in something new. We see that in scripture, a revival. Lord, awaken something new in our lives. And so even just thinking like, how can I change this routine up? How can I, maybe switch up where I'm reading my Bible, or maybe I'll listen to an audio Bible, or maybe I'll, read my Bible with my kids while they're coloring, or get my, phone out of the room while I'm reading my Bible. Like, what does this look like for you? To do something new, to get you excited, get a new daily grace co-study. You know what I'm saying? Like, just do something fun. But yeah, I would say those are probably two big practicals. There's so many other ones in the book though.
Okay, I love that because I feel like sometimes the encouragement is almost the opposite, like do the same thing every time, every week. And I don't, like, as much as I love like routine, like I just don't thrive in that, especially if I feel like I'm in a rut. And something we've done with our boys, our summer motto is try new things, because they do not like to try new things. And honestly, I have felt so refreshed, even though we might be quote unquote doing more. Like we tried disc golf for the first time. It was wild, but it was fun.
That sounds hard.
It was hard. My husband, very good. Me, lost in the woods. Like things are flying everywhere. We lost it in the water. But there's just something about like stepping out and doing something new, even as a family, that was just so refreshing and fun and create some memories. And it just like got us out of the rut of being at home and doing the same thing. And so I love just that advice, like changing things up and even just seeing like what the Lord might have for you. Like how might he surprise you in finding a new hobby or doing something different? Like, oh, I never thought about reading my Bible in this place. Like I've moved a chair recently and I was like, it's amazing how moving this chair in my living room has actually shifted how I read. It sounds so strange, but just a new location has really...
It's real.
It is real. And so I just love, like, that's so practical and so simple. And yeah, I do think it's really impactful. So, okay.
Yeah.
I have one last question. I do feel like you have somewhat answered this question in many ways. And so feel free to tie some of those threads together if need be. But this is a question we asked you last time. It's a question we ask every guest that comes on the podcast. But at the Daily Grace Co, we say the gospel changes everything. So we would love to hear from you. Tara, what has the gospel changed for you?
I would love to go. I need to go back and listen to what I said last time when I was on the show a year ago, and I will. But I think currently in my own life, the gospel has changed the way that I see. I don't know, just the way that I see every day and the way I show up presently every day. I think there's so much temptation for me to strive and to worry about the next day and to not be present in my actual day, when I'm just realizing the gospel has freed me to live free of worries of tomorrow, to live free of the burdens that I self-impose. And I think so the gospel has really reminded me that I can just steward today, that I can just live today, because I am so much of like, I'm in tomorrow already, or I'm in next week already. But the gospel has really reminded me that, you know what? Jesus has saved me for today and tomorrow, but all I can do is today. And it may sound weird, but it actually helps me to be more present today, like where my 2 feet are, with my boys, with my husband, with my friends, in the house that I'm in the situations that maybe I don't love and maybe I'm not content with. It's like, no, I'm gonna be here. And that's changed everything for me lately. And it's what I've really needed, because I have been struggling with a little bit of discontentment, with a little bit of almost like this anxiety of like wanting to get out of the day and hurry on to the next day because there's so much to do. But yeah, I would say that's really changed things for me.
Yeah. Oh man, I feel that deeply. And I'm just so thankful that we were able to carve out this time to catch up, to hear a little bit more about what the Lord is doing in your life through this book. So Tara, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Krystal, you're the best. I am so grateful. Thank you.
Oh, we are grateful too. And we're excited to connect our listeners to you. And so for everyone listening, we are going to link ways to connect with Tara in the show notes. We'll link to her podcast and her books. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to our weekly newsletter and join us on Instagram as we continue the conversation over there at Daily Grace Podcast. We'll see you next time.